Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Welcome into the MTOM Show podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. Joining us is, I believe now, the most frequent guest of the MTOM Show podcast, James Roemer, Best Weather Inc. How you doing, James?
Wow, that's great. I should get an award.
You should.
You guys should get an award, too. You always get awards. Things are great. Thank you very much.
We always talk weather, and it's last week, or 2 weeks ago now, I guess, is when this comes out. From this day that we're recording on Tuesday was a major storm in Iowa, Greenfield, Iowa specifically. But there were other storms in Oklahoma, in Texas. I mean, it has been a very, very busy weather season. So I thought all the better reason to have you on this week. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Any idea why we're so busy and active?
Well, when you go back and look at the incredible snows, 40, 50 feet in Tahoe and in California this past winter, that resulted in really a warm winter in the Midwest, obviously, one of the warmest on record, that pressured natural gas 50% again. When you have the weakening El Ninos and the incredible storms in California, that happen maybe once every 5 or 10 years, typically that kind of contributes to the very active tornado season in the Midwest. So that's what we've been seeing here over the last month or two.
And you're in Florida, and already in short sleeve humidity season. Our friend Sean Hackett is going to be with us here on the show. And I told him our weather is very much like it is there for you. Bright and sunny, then it rains for 2 minutes, and then the bright and sun comes back out. So it's going to be Florida weather.
Certainly so. I lived in Iowa certainly for 12 to 15 years. I had my share of tornadoes and incredible winter snows. It would be, 55 degrees one day and 15 the next. I love Iowa weather, but certainly this severe weather needs to end, as obviously corn and soybean farmers need a break. The drought is breaking, and that's one reason why I think new crop corn and beans don't have much more upside potential if we have generally good weather going into the summer.
Normally, James, I make you be the weather guy and stand in front and point to everything that's around you, but I'm going to be in control this week of your slides. Is that okay?
Love it. Yes.
Okay, what we're going to do is, first, again, Best Weather Inc. is what we've talked about, is you talk commodities and you talk weather, and you have a strong interest in them both, and this is no different. So there's a little bit of what you do, but let's talk about Russia, because that has been the big thing in the wheat market, has been what's going on and how dry. They had a frost, or they had a freeze in Russia. Any indication this was coming?
Well, we did see the freeze about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and in my newsletter, Weather Wealth, that farmers and traders around the world can download and take a look at samples. I did mention this concern to the wheat market. Not only that, but there's been other problems around the world with wheat crops too wet in the soft red wheat belt. Parts of the Southern Plains had drought about a month or two ago. But really, corn and soybeans have been rallying in sympathy with that and some previous South American weather problems. I expect those grain markets to kind of deviate and separate as far as their price action goes, as I think some of this weather in the wheat area is already built into prices in Russia.
Let's transition to wheat areas of the United States, where, as you say on this chart right here, it's been too dry for parts of the plains. But that line is kind of narrowing. It looks like there's a little more moisture in some of the plains. Is there any particular reason in your mind why that's happening?
Well, because we still have lingering El Nino conditions, we have seen some improvement in the Kansas crop the last couple of weeks. Otherwise, wheat prices would probably be 10% higher than this. And we see off and on storms continuing over the Midwest and Southern Plains wheat areas. We still have some warming in the Pacific, weak El Nino conditions. So I do expect off and on rain chances here for some wheat areas in the plains, but it's a little bit late to really help the crop in Oklahoma and Texas. They'll need drier weather, obviously, in June for the harvest.
The big question that I get is, all right, fine, we have rain now. We'll get it planted in the grain belt. What's the moisture outlook look like for the rest of the growing season, at least through pollination?
Well, if you look at the active tornado seasons like 2019, 2003, if you look at weakening El Ninos like the strong one in 2015 that weakened by the summer in 2016, I kind of look at all these different analogs and teleconnections. Generally, I think we're going to probably have good pollination weather, and probably a bear market in new crop corn and beans at some point. Um, Obviously, the record warm ocean temperatures, incredible record warm weather. I personally do believe in climate change somewhat, more, in my opinion. Everyone has a different opinion than sunspot cycles and things. But the record warm oceans, the incredible hurricanes we've had over the last few years, that is a question. That's a caveat. Will we have a hot summer in the face of maybe normal to above normal rainfall? If it wasn't for the record warm oceans, I would be like 90% confident that indeed we'd have a perfect pollination season. So we have to kind of monitor what's going on with this warming planet and how things will maybe change or not in the next 4 to 8 weeks.
You look at your next slide here, and this is specifically when it comes to Kansas City wheat. I teased a little bit about already with the plains, but explain this chart to me.
Yeah, basically in my newsletter, I will talk about anti-herd mentality. How many people are long or short of market? Too many people are long, then the anti-herd mentality is bearish. Crop moisture indices around the world, global crops, things like that. I look at all these different factors and I put them in my newsletter and basically give trading strategies. So really, I've been slightly bullish wheat about 2 weeks ago, catching part of this 10 to 15% move up. Why not extremely bullish? Why not a +8 spider? Global crop score being a +4, the highest it could be, the temperature index of +4. These scales go from -4, very bearish, to +4. Why not more bullish? Perhaps because of the decent plains wheat crop. And seasonally, wheat prices usually go down 75 to 80% of the time as we go into the month of June.
Well, part of that is because of rainfall, and again, it's tied to what's going on in Ukraine and Western Russia. I think Americans always kind of think they're the ones driving the market, but specifically in wheat, it is Ukraine and Western Russia that you mentioned here. Let's a little more detailed look of what's going on there. Tell me what these regions mean to the wheat market of the world.
Well, I think what Russia and Ukraine is in the top, two or three biggest exporters in the world. And obviously, this is very, very important. My goodness, not only the Russian-Ukraine war is adding to the fire, but of course, this drought situation and freeze with a perhaps 10 to 15% reduction in their crop, that's going to really make our situation very tight for the wheat market. So the question really becomes what happens with El Nino transition to La Nina and what happens longer term. I'm not quite sure about that right now, but I do think that as we get into the harvest, unless we have additional problems in other parts of the world for wheat, we'll probably top out here somewhat within the next 1 to 2 weeks.
You want to dip your toe into what this means politically if this happens to Russia's upper hand that they've been even since the invasion of Ukraine?
Oh boy, I'll let you comment on that. Boy,
Didn't think so. Just wanted to make sure. But do you think it would have some impact then?
But it certainly will. What Russia and Ukraine do with respect to exports right now and their whole political situation, it's very, very complicated. I mean, there could be a tremendous squeeze, and perhaps I'll be wrong. Maybe we'll have another 20% rally in wheat prices over the next 3 or 4 months. But I think that was only going to happen. I think if we see problems with the spring wheat crop further east around the Urals and Volga Valley in Russia, and if the northern plains in Canada that's been so wet recently continue to have planting delays and then a drought this summer, then I think we'll have a 20% rally up in wheat. But right now, I think things will settle down somewhat from where they've been over the last few weeks with the wheat market.
And you also, again, there's a little bit of a global picture now. Again, this is you've said El Nino a couple of times. On the right hand side of this screen, James, you've got the still warm and occasional El Nino conditions and the cooling. That is in South America. And I see some of the same color there between Hawaii and the United States and California. Are those two tied together? Is that important to have those similarities?
Well, we have at Nino 1.2, there's 4 different regions along the equator that dictate whether we have an El Nino or not. And Nino 1.2, as you can see around Peru and off the coast of South America is cooling. As that expands further and further west, that would increase the likelihood of La Nina. As you see to the east of Australia, Nino 4 region is still relatively warm. And that and something we call a kind of positive global angular momentum. I'm not going to go into it too quickly, but it has to do with the skaters sort of like putting their hands close together and spinning very, very quickly. Positive GLAM, acceleration, positive global angular momentum is a signal that El Nino is still holding on slightly, and also because of the warming you see to the east of Australia. So until that cooling moves further to the west from Peru and global angular momentum torque begins to weaken, we still have occasional weak El Nino conditions. And as a result, this may salvage any real drought potential for Midwest corn and soybean farmers this summer, as long as we have kind of neutral to weak El Nino conditions.
Let's move now into your next. This is your June history rainfall trends with weakening El Nino towards La Nina.
Okay.
What is the what is the reasons here on drier June weather? You say drier June weather should benefit corn and soybean planting. Do you still stand by that?
I think so. I mean, we have more severe weather here over the next 5 to 10 days coming into parts of the Midwest. And hopefully the tornado season will begin to weaken a little bit here in a couple of weeks. I think we're seeing some shifts in the jet stream pattern that will bring about, after about the 4th or 5th of June, a week or two of much needed drier weather. Obviously, like in the great floods in Iowa in 1993 and the planting delays of 2008, we had a disaster in our hands along the Mississippi River and in the Missouri River areas with incredibly bull markets in corn and beans. I don't see that June being anywhere close to that. Sometimes during weak El Nino events, you're going to see the severe weather and flooding exist through the month of June. Obviously, we have to dry out. So with a drought breaking and then maybe 2 weeks or so of great planting weather by early to mid-June, I think that will eventually be bearish new crop corn and soybeans.
But don't you think that there's that possibility that we get too late for the corn if we get too far into June, if that window opens for planting?
Yeah, it's getting a little bit late right now, but it seems to me that farmers are getting into the fields over maybe 70 to 75% of the corn belt pretty easily, even with these off and on thunderstorms right now. So, for soybeans, certainly that's going to be a great time window to plant in 2 or 3 weeks. Corn, it may be a little bit late, but we're not really that far behind nationally as far as corn planting goes at all. So I don't think it's really going to be a major issue, just in some spotty locations that I've seen, unfortunately, yes, at parts of Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, some severe weather and flooding. Hopefully enough 2 to 4 day windows to allow planting to resume here over the next couple of weeks.
I have to tell you, though, James, what's in and up looks very good in the limited windshield tour that I have seen this year. So if you were one of those that got it in pretty early in April, you're welcoming this shower at this opportunity, or at this moment, at this point of the crop.
Yeah, and of course, with the new hybrids and technology over the last number of years, look what happened last summer in the midst of a drought. We still had above normal yields. So we had timely rains in July that I predicted quite early, and hopefully, that's going to continue. Typically, the real bad Midwestern droughts, 2011, 2012, 83, 88, the bull markets in the summer and yields dropping 10 to 20% below trend line happened during not all, but at least a third to half La Nina events. So everyone talking about La Nina because of that warming I just mentioned a few minutes ago east of Australia. There's still lingering El Nino conditions. Hopefully that's not going to cool off that quickly and allow, again, occasional El Nino conditions to persist and a decent summer crop for Midwestern corn and soybean farmers.
Looking at now, we have, this is, again, European. This is the Europe-Russia weather trends when El Nino is transitioning to La Nina. You've got three charts here, or three maps. Rainfall trends, jet stream pattern, temperature trends. How far of a departure is this from normal? Is that illustrated here?
Well, that big red area, that blocking ridge you see in the middle map, that tends to occur with almost two-thirds of weakening El Ninos that transition to La Nina by the summer or fall. And that blocking ridge is going to continue here for at least another 1 to 2 weeks. Now, if it expands further east into June and July, into the spring wheat areas of Russia, then we have a real major situation on our hand, like 2010, and a potential explosive wheat market well beyond just the month of May. And that I'm still studying right now. But generally, with weakening El Nino events, you see dry weather there and above normal temperatures. And that's still a concern right now for the Ukraine and Western Russia. I'm not quite sure about the spring wheat areas just yet and what may happen. I'll be looking at this more closely in the next few weeks.
Okay, this is hypothetical. Back me off if I'm too close or something. What happens if some of these trends continue, and is it potential to lose a third of the Russian crop due to these conditions?
Well, it's certainly possible, Paul. That's a good question. And again, with the war going on in Ukraine, I don't really know the ability the farmers have to harvest a decent crop anyway, right? So this is certainly an unknown territory. Having a drought over 20 to 30% of the Russian wheat areas, and Ukraine about 50% of their region at least, following a frost and a war going on. This is an unprecedented situation that potentially could really tighten the global wheat balance for sure if this continues.
And if it, again, just using that 1/3 as a potential, what does that translate to global stocks and global production, and what does that mean for other countries?
Yeah, so I think we already have, I think, the lowest wheat stocks in about, I don't know, 12 to 16 years. So with Russia and Ukraine being the top, second, third, fourth biggest producers in the world, obviously a 10 to 20% reduction in their crop would lower the supply situation by probably at least 5%.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe we could go to $8 or $9 over the course of the summer. It's possible.
Yeah.
But I do think you'll see the corn and soybean market, which began this past week, separate itself if the weather improves. Separate itself from the wheat market if the weather improves going into June and July for Midwest corn and soybean crops.
And that's the next slide I needed to get to. I apologize for being a little slow on that poll there. But I guess your question is highlighted here in yellow. How will U.S. weather impact the psychology? Let's flip over to December corn and November beans. Behind you, James, is a chart of December corn that you were talking about earlier. But explain to me these three maps. It's percent of normal rainfall over the late part of May into June, and then moving ahead. You talked about windows earlier. What do you see here in these patterns, and that what producers should be paying attention to?
Well, I was sort of bullish corn and beans a few weeks ago because of this incredible flooding in South America, in Rio Grande do Sul, and also the dryness of the second corn crop in Paraná. But demand has been so poor that really the South American weather hasn't been enough of a factor to really create a major bull market. But these maps pretty much show that as we go into June and July, and El Nino begins to weaken a little bit further, as long as there's not a La Nina situation, and we have a dry June for the end of planting for corn and for soybean planting, and a decent moisture this July and August, we'll probably go into a bear market in corn and beans, perhaps down to $4 or lower in December corn, and maybe $10 or 10.5 in November soybeans. Of course, the China equations are always key. What's going to happen with their crops? What's going to happen with their poor economy right now? So there are a lot of factors I try to watch at Best Weather to figure out what prices will do, not just the weather, of course.
I ask this on the TV show every once in a while. Are we in a weather market right now when it comes to corn and beans?
It's been confusing. Yes, we are. I mean, we did see old crop corn and beans try to rally here somewhat, particularly soybeans on the South American problems in the last few weeks. But the demand situation, as I mentioned, is kind of horrendous, unfortunately. And we're beginning to see December corn and November soybeans begin to top out, I think, because of forecasts for drier weather in June and the drought breaking in the Midwest.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, that's back to this slide again of drier June weather should benefit corn and soybean planting, and continue to hurt. Dry June could hurt that wheat crop there. But this is probably the thing that's hurt me the most, is this photo of you with the big glasses. Sorry.
Yeah, where are they? There they go.
Oh,
Thanks. Yeah. Well, yeah, you could see that the bottom picture, that the drought breaking, where you see red on the top picture in Iowa. We had a really warm winter once again, below normal snowfall. The drought pretty much continuing really the last couple of years, even though yields were above trend line last year, which was incredible. But you can see the bottom map. However, the last 2 to 4 weeks, unfortunately, with severe weather, that red area in Iowa and parts of Minnesota and the Western Corn Belt has pretty much eased. Now it's white. It's normal, and that's why a dry June, if we have it, won't be a concern to the corn and soybean market. We have enough subsoil moisture right now. It's just going to let us have great early germination and finish up, corn and soybean planting next month.
I talked to a farmer over the weekend, and he told me that the rain and the waves, even though it's been heavy, 1 to 2 inches at times, since the subsoil in Iowa was so dry coming into it, that rain was allowed to just go down, and the roots went down with it, and it just kept going down. Because otherwise, those roots might not have gone down very deep if it kept hitting dry dirt, right? Roots don't go down in dry dirt if it's not finding moisture.
That's right. So I think, right, the moisture hasn't happened just all of a sudden. I think it's been over the course of the last 4 to 6 weeks. We've seen off and on chances for rain. And as a result, this is definitely beneficial. It could result in a pretty good big crop this summer.
One thing about the map, before I flip to the next slide, is looking at California. Almost the entire state has been out of drought in these two slides, that the April 9th, the May 23rd. No drought in an area that's been heavy in drought. But then I also want to point to the big changes in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And again, you mentioned Iowa. But New Mexico, still dry. Arizona, still dry. But really, look at the eastern 2/3 of Oklahoma, out of drought. Kansas, eastern, probably we'll just say 1/4, maybe 1/3. And then Missouri is looking good. So overall, a lot of areas greatly improved here.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, the incredible snows in California, the severe weather and the flooding this winter, that usually translates to a relatively active tornado season and above normal moisture in parts of the eastern plains and Midwest, and that's what's pretty much happened over the last 4 to 6 weeks.
A few of your weather headlines. We talked about the active. I mentioned Greenfield off the top. I think what I've written the last couple of weeks about the weather comparison is we're the least amount of drought in the United States since 2020, derecho year, but just not so much. I think Iowa was leading in number of tornadoes after the Greenfield tornado. I don't know if anybody overtook them to date, 2024 to date. Sorry, I should explain myself there. But are we in a more average or above average season as a whole here? You've got some 1974 and 2003 stats here on the screen now.
Yeah, so we're definitely, one of the most active seasons. And I should point out, thanks for bringing that up, Paul, 1974, that was actually a pretty strong La Nina. And after kind of a wet spring, we had one of the worst droughts, of the century, like in the mid-30s, mid-50s, and certainly the 83 and 2011 droughts. So that was a La Nina event. If we had La Nina conditions right now, I'd be really concerned that we're going to have a hot, dry summer. So 74 may be an anomaly. Hopefully that's not going to happen. Most of these active tornado seasons, again, this is probably one of the highest in history in Iowa. I think if you go back and look at the top 6 or 7, I think 5 out of 7 had above normal trendline yields for corn and soybeans, only 2, 74. And I think 83 was very active too. And that created a drought in the Midwest as well. So I try to make these correlations between teleconnections, sea ice, La Nina, El Nino, weather weirdos, I call them, strange weather events like the historical snows in California, the record tornado season. And I try to look at different analogs and make these projections sometimes up to 6 months in advance.
Well, you have 2003 and 2008 mentioned here, and in 2011, high active period with destructive tornadoes across multiple states. That was La Nina. Then the neutral year of 2019, continuous and frequent tornado activity, particularly in May and June, impacting the Midwest significantly. If I could just say one thing about this, the old Elwyn Taylor used to say that we go in patterns of years, 10 to 14 years of patterns. The number to take out 1974 out of this discussion, James. 2003 to 2024, last time my math, it's 21 years. We're outside of a active weather pattern. But if you go a little more, let's say even 2011, it fits into that 12 to 14 year period. So I'm not asking if this is climate change. I'm just saying, is this just part of a more active pattern that we're in right now?
Yeah, I do believe someone in cycles, certainly, and Sean's an expert in that. I mean, I know he'll be your guest soon too. Yeah, the solar activity right now, the incredible active sun, these cycles of 11 to 22 years, all these do play certainly into the weather, and it's something we need to watch. There is some concern. 2003, that is one of my analog years. The summer was relatively good for corn, but I think we ended up having kind of a hot, dry August. So it's possible, even though I'm expecting decent corn and soybean crops, if you look strictly at these cycles, if you look at 2003 as being one of the potential analog years, maybe August, out of all these months coming up, could be the one that's the most concern for the soybean crop, possibly with a hot, dry August like in 2003. July should be good.
And that's what you also say here in this slide of July temperatures and rainfall trends. And that hot cool is kind of right there in the middle, at least where I'm seated. But the western U.S. looks hot, which we've, of course, seen that some ridiculously hot weather in California and Arizona and Nevada over the last few years. And then, again, we kind of talk about, I'm going to fly through here because, James, I know I'm up against your clock. And you've got December corn futures high. And I guess if you want to look at some, you've got a star here on the bottom of 2024. And are you looking at that? Is it going to follow pattern? Is there any pattern that we can look at for guidance right now?
Well, I think I'd look at, if you want to look at analog years, weakening El Ninos like 2016, like 2003. 2003 had much more of a severe weather threat like this season in the Midwest. And, that is about 22 years approximately, the 22-year cycle with the sunspots and all that, would suggest possibly, a hot, dry August. That's going to be questionable right now. We're going to be monitoring the El Nino and La Nina very quickly. If La Nina forms more suddenly by end of July and August, then I think we're going to be in for some concern for the soybean crop in August. But right now, I'm keeping an optimistic view that overall we're going to have generally a decent summer. Doesn't mean we won't have a few weather scares here and there. We always do. But for the most part, I'm expecting, particularly for corn, above normal yields this summer.
And I did flip to your last chart here of just kind of laying out when we had some delays and when some things were up and down. But historically, right now, we're at least over the last 5 years, this chart on the left of the screen, December 19 corn, we're still, right now in 2024, we're above what we were on that 19 chart at this time. So historically, we're higher to start with, right?
Yeah, yes, we are. Obviously with inflation and some of the South American weather problems we've had over the last few months. But I mean, obviously, to go down to $3 in corn, that's not going to happen anytime soon. With inflation and with La Nina forming, right? It may not happen this summer, and that would be good news for the grain crops in the Midwest, but it should happen by the fall. And if it does, that will open the door for problems in Argentina next winter, their summer. So if we do have a bear market in corn and beans this spring and summer, we have the potential for a big bull market next winter, their summer, because of La Nina and South American crop problems.
Yeah, we didn't even get into South America's issues. That'll have to be when you come back again.
All right. Look
All
forward to
right, real
it.
quick, James, before we go, headline. Give me 2 headlines from this that we should take away from what you're telling us.
Drier June weather, good news for the soybean planting and also for corn germination, perhaps a bear market. Still concerned about the Russian wheat situation and doubt we're going to go into a longer term bear market in wheat anytime soon.
James Roemer, Best Weather Inc. So good to see you again, my friend.
Love it. I want to come out to Iowa. I've been saying that for 5 years, lived there for about 12 years in Des Moines.
You know, we took Sean Hackett to the state fair last year, the Iowa State Fair. He actually brought his family up and experienced it. So, just saying, end of August,
October?
it's beautiful. You can wear the weather on you and feel like you're back in Florida in August in Iowa.
I wish it was in like September or October during like Oktoberfest, but maybe I'll try to make it out there. We'll see. This year
All
may be
right.
difficult. Next year.
There you
All right.
go. I'm Paul Yeager. This has been the MTOM Show podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. This episode is produced by me, Paul Yeager. Executive producer is David Miller. Our sound technicians are Sean Ingracia, David Feingold, and Kevin Rivers. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.